Greetings, everyone, and welcome to session number 2 of the 30-day intensive on the topic of the Holy Spirit. For those who do not know me, my name is Bradley. I am also the host of Voices of Revival. Voices of Revival is a video podcast focused on uniting revivalists with a focus on the Dayton, Cincinnati region of Ohio. Through the month of September, we are entering into this 30-day intensive where we will be delving into the topic of the Holy Spirit. The title of this intensive is A More Excellent Way. That title is driven from at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where Paul lays out the gifts. He basically says that this is, walking in these things, a more excellent way. And it boils down to the ideal of when we do life in the Spirit, where we walk in the Spirit, in the fullness of the Spirit. This is the more excellent way that God has designed for us to walk in. So many believers are complacent in their walk with God when God has so much more for them. Us walking in the more that God has for us, it is found when we walk in the things of the Spirit. Through this 30-day intensive, we will wrestle with what it means to walk in the Spirit as we unpack who the Spirit of God is and the various gifts of the Spirit. In this second session, we will be delving specifically with the question of who is the Holy Spirit. Who is the Holy Spirit? Simple answer. He is God. So often we make the Holy Spirit about what He does for us and we forget who He is. And we compare the Holy Spirit to less things, right? Like the language we use regarding the Holy Spirit, oftentimes, like we will refer to the Holy Spirit as a thing or as an it. A lot of people, their understanding of the Holy Spirit is just a feeling, right? To some people, the Holy Spirit is music. It's a beat. It's a feeling. It is an experience that you experience when you gather with other believers. If this is your understanding of the Holy Spirit, then you've missed it. You do not understand who He is. We talk about the Holy Spirit with such little regard. Who is the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit is God. He is as much God as God the Father or as Jesus Christ Himself. Who is the Holy Spirit? He is God. He has all power. He sees all things. He knows all things. Everything that God is, Holy Spirit is. Everything that God is, Holy Spirit is. Psalm says that God is everlasting. In the Psalms, it says that God is everlasting to everlasting. We understand that there is an eternal future in the distance. Just as there is an eternal future in the distance, there is an eternal past behind us. Holy Spirit, it was there in the eternal past. Holy Spirit will be there in the eternal future. Holy Spirit is everlasting to everlasting. Before the beginning, Holy Spirit was. He stands outside of time, yielding all power, seeing all things, knowing all things, present in every place. He is all powerful, all seeing, all knowing, all present. I say Holy Spirit was present before the beginning. Just as He was present before the beginning, He was present in the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, Holy Spirit is there. And do you know, before God ever speaks a word of creation, we see Holy Spirit moving. How does the book of Genesis begin? The book of Genesis begins with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was void and without form. And then catch this, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. That word move there is an action. In the Hebrew, it is a verb, it is an action. The Holy Spirit does an action before God speaks a word of creation. It says that the Holy Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. It could also be translated as brood, right? The Holy Spirit brewed upon the face of the waters. The Holy Spirit shook the waters. The Holy Spirit pushed the state of the world from the complacent, stagnant state it was into a state of motion. Before God ever speaks a word, in Genesis chapter 1, Holy Spirit is there moving upon the face of the waters. The Holy Spirit was the catalyst of the work of God in the beginning. Through the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit played a very significant role. In the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit. So let's back up. Where is Holy Spirit now? And this is jumping ahead, right? Because we'll touch more on this to come. But the Holy Spirit dwells inside of every New Testament believer. If you are a follower of Christ, the Spirit of the living God lives inside of you. Now, rewind to the Old Testament, right? Before Calvary, before the sacrifice of Jesus, this was not so. The Holy Spirit did not dwell inside of the believers. The Holy Spirit would come and he would move upon people at different times. Additionally, the Holy Spirit dwelled, a very significant role of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. The Holy Spirit dwelled in the holies of holies in the temple. And now understand this, the high priest would enter into the holies of holies, into the presence of the Spirit of God once a year to make atonement for all of the people, right? And let's talk about this. So the high priest would enter into the presence of the Spirit of the living God within the holies of the holies. And as he entered in, it is said that the high priest would tie a rope around his ankle. He would run and he would go into the holies of holies. That rope would be stretched out outside of the holies of holies. There would be people waiting outside with that rope in hand, right? And there would be bells tied to this rope. And the people on the outside holding one end of this rope, if they heard the bells stop ringing, they understood that the high priest was not right with God. And when he had entered into the presence of the Spirit of God, if he was not right with God, he would be struck dead in the presence of God. Who is the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit is that holy God that was in the holies of holies. And if the high priest was not right with God, he would be struck dead in the presence of the Spirit of God. Who is the Spirit of God? He is that same God that was in the holies of holies. Who is the Spirit of God? He is the same God that brewed upon the face of the waters. That was the catalyst of the creation story. Now, the Holy Spirit did not only just rest within the holies of holies, but the Holy Spirit also in the Old Testament rested on the Ark of the Covenant. Right? And only those of the tribe of Levi could touch the Ark of the Covenant. And there's this story where the Israelites are moving the Ark from one place to another with the Holy Spirit resting upon the Ark of the Covenant. And as they're moving the Ark begins to shake and it begins to stumble and begins to fall. And then there's this one Israelite present who was not a Levite. He could not touch the Ark. His name was like Jehu or something. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. But he reaches out to stabilize the Ark of the Covenant to prevent it from falling. But he's not a Levite. He's not worthy enough to touch the ark. He's not worthy enough to touch the presence of God, to touch the Spirit of God. He reaches out to stabilize it and stop it. He's struck dead. Who is the Spirit of God? He is the same holy God that was in the holies of holies. Who is the Spirit of God? He is the same holy God that rested upon the Ark of the Covenant. He is the same. He has not changed. He is the same. You know, in David's writings in Psalms, there's a couple places where David kind of portrays this ideal, like he says this statement in a couple different ways in a couple different places, but he basically says, hide me in the shadow of your wings, God. Now, on the Ark of the Covenant, where the Spirit of God rested, there were cherubims on the ends of the ark, right? David was not a Levite. Remember talking about the story of Jehu, only Levites could touch the ark, right? And if someone else touches them, they die. Okay, they die. David's not a Levite. He can't touch the ark. King David can't touch the ark. He cannot touch the presence of God. History would tell us, while David could not touch the Ark of the Covenant, David could not touch the presence of God. He would go and pray before the ark. Okay, and it is said that when light would hit the ark, it would cast a shadow, and David, not being able to touch the ark, would go lay in the shadow of the ark and pray and seek God. Who is the Holy Spirit? He's the same God that required holiness. He's also the same God that David did everything in his power to get as close to him as possible. He is a holy God that desires for us to walk in communion with him. Yesterday when we looked at, or in our previous session number 1, when we looked at the overview of the gifts and wrestled with various contexts from Paul's writings to the Corinthians, the very last verse in 2 Corinthians, Paul's final verse that he pens to the Corinthians, he basically charges them to walk in communion with the Holy Spirit, right? Like, he is a holy God, but he is a holy God that desires for us to walk in communion with him. Who is he? He is God. He is holy. The same God who moved before God speaks a word of creation, is driving force of creation. That is the Holy Spirit, and he dwells inside of us. The same Holy Spirit that was there in the holies of holies when an unworthy high priest in Area would be struck dead. He is that same holy God that dwells in us. He's the same holy God that was touched when he reached out to save the ark. He is the same holy God that David would go and lay in the shadow of. He is the same. And he desires for us to walk in communion with him. He is not a feeling. He is not an experience. We do experience him, but he is not an experience, right? Like the people you know in life, like, are they your time with them? Or is there something more to them than your time with them? Like the people you do life with, they are living, breathing entities. In the same manner, Holy Spirit is alive. He is not far. He is not distant. He dwells in us and desires to walk in communion with us. He has made his abode within us. He has made his home within us. He desires to walk in communion with us. He is a God who speaks. We'll hit on more of this later, right? But he is a God who speaks. He is not a God who is silent. He is a God who speaks. In Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, John writes to 7 different churches in Asia in his day, right? These 7 different churches are 7 churches that are 100% in the same biblical dispensation as us, the same biblical time period. Everything that defined their laws of existence spiritually defines our laws of existence spiritually. And to each of these 7 churches, the final thing that John pins to them, the final thing that John says to each of these 7 churches is, he that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church. May we be people with ears willing to hear what the Spirit of the living God is saying to us. He is a God who speaks. He is a God who is holy. He is a God who is everlasting to everlasting. He is a God who dwelled before the beginning and will dwell after the end. He has all power. He has all knowledge. He sees all things. He knows all things. Nothing is hidden from him. All power belongs to him. He is holy, and he is looking for a holy people that will walk in communion with us. I would challenge you to take time and slow down and simply acknowledge the Holy Spirit that dwells inside of you. See him for who he is. In our next session, session number 3 of this More Excellent Way 30-day intensive, this 30-day dive into the topic of the Holy Spirit. In our next session, we will be looking at what Jesus taught pertaining to the coming of the Holy Spirit. Until then.